Hi guys, today I'm going to be talking to Felicia Kalan. She's a Republican candidate running for the 22nd Council District, which covers Astoria and parts of East Elmhurst and Woodside. Hey Felicia, thank you for joining me today.
Hi Christian, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to chat with you today.
Oh, terrific. So Felicia, you're running for the 22nd Council District, covering mainly Astoria, parts of East Elmhurst. Now, why are you running, and sort of what's your experience and background for your candidacy?
Sure. So I'm a mom of two. I live in Astoria, and I decided to run for city council because I saw career politicians out of touch with everyday people, like our family. My husband and I actually originally moved to Queens because he got a job at a church at Journey Queens in Forest Hills.
Mm-hmm.
And then later they were doing a church plant in Astoria, which is what brought us to Astoria. And now he actually serves as a pastor and elder at a church that serves Ravenswood and Queensbridge housing.
Oh, yes.
So I've been so Ravenswood is a little bit in my district, but it's mostly outside of it, which I'm actually grateful for because we just get to serve, wholeheartedly.
Right.
And so it's good. I've been very involved in the community.
Mm-hmm.
This is kind of the next step for me in loving and serving my neighbors and putting people before politics, which is why I'm running.
Okay. Now, it's the primary on the Democratic side. There's a lot of people that are, putting forward very progressive platforms. You're running on the Republican line. So how is your platform different, and how do you think you will win the general election come November?
Right. It's a great question. I think everybody's running based on their own convictions, and I would call myself someone who could appeal to moderate Democrats and Republicans. So I decided to run on the Republican line because really I believe in the beauty of our democratic system. And currently at City Council, there's only 3 of the 51 members voted in who are not Democrat. Mm-hmm. And I think we can all agree, whether we're Republican or Democrat or independent or libertarian, that hasn't produced the best outcomes for our city. And there's a lot of people who haven't had a voice at City Hall. And so that's why I decided to run. I think that bringing more accountability into the system is a good thing. But I'm also someone who, endorsed by 21 and 21, which I'm the only Republican they endorsed in the race, and their goal is to get 21 women elected. I am absolutely ready to work on the other side of the aisle for what's best for our community. So I really wish there wasn't political party in city council races, but I am running on the Republican line. And I'm running as an independent as well. The Independence Party and Libertarian lines were removed, which was a political move. And it's really, I'd seen it, but I have like an independent thought in a lot of things as well. And I think what differentiates me is I'm not a career politician. I'm not running on my own agenda. I want this to be truly representative of the community. Okay. And I'm a, common sense person.
All right, Felicia. So tell me, what isn't working? You just mentioned that you need different voices because the city council isn't working. Can you elaborate on that? What isn't working?
So much isn't working. I'll start with, we did have a $92 billion budget. I think now it's $88 billion. We're in a budget deficit. There's been a lot of waste in spending. And it's not just because I'm Republican saying that. Whether it's Thrive NYC or some of the other programs, unfortunately, there's zero accountability. We have a lot of tax revenue. We're not using it to the best of the needs of our community. I think you see at the city level, I'm a mom of two. I have a 6 and 4-year-old, and I'm very invested in the public education system here. And especially with all that we've seen with the pandemic, there is a strong need for mayoral and DOE accountability. And I believe the only way we can achieve that is through implementing a school board model. And that's one of my main goals as a city council woman. And I believe that we can achieve that goal. And I think it's necessary now more than ever. I also think that, COVID-19 has absolutely devastated our communities, both in public health and an economic level. And I don't agree with the way that the shutdowns have completely devastated our small businesses without giving them any relief. I would have been very different and active through this whole process if I was the city councilwoman now, and I would not have agreed to full shutdowns without any indoor dining. I think it crushed our small businesses. We've seen over a third of them close down, and it's just been devastating on the local level, and people can't feed their families, and it affects the most vulnerable neighbors that we have living here, who work in the food service industry.
Okay. So how would have you done it then? I mean, you might have, you know, a lot of health advocates said that, you know, that these places needed to be shut down. So how
Right.
then would have you handled it? Would have you sort of said, hey, listen,
Yeah.
I don't know if we should listen to you. We should, you know, make sure our small businesses survive. Kind of, it's a balance. But how would you handle
The
scientists
balance.
saying, you know,
Mhm.
shut them down?
Well, I actually think we have the science there to prove it, because the tracing said that only about 1%, could be traced back to small businesses. I absolutely think we should follow the science,
Yeah.
and I think that the science was there to say, of course, initially you shut down, you understand what we have in our hands,
Yeah.
but then we could have been operating at 25 and 50% capacity, just like Long Island or some of the
Mm,
surrounding areas. And then you have areas in Queens that are bordering Long Island that, the restaurants on the other side of the border can open up. And guess what? People go there and they
yeah.
eat because it's not too far.
No, yeah.
So I don't think it was sound policy. And I think it devastated a lot of our small businesses.
Okay, that's fair. Now, one thing that the council weighed on very heavily in 2020 was the police and the budget. Now, you mentioned sort of how you view things a little differently. Many of the
Right.
candidates in the 22nd district are advocates for cutting the police budget, etc. How would you handle the NYPD? What would you advocate for
Yeah.
if you were to be the council person?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I will start with saying I'm the chairwoman of the Interfaith Coalition for Peace and Safety. So I've been on the ground working with positive community relations and police efforts. The organization that I am the chairwoman of was started by a Sheikh Musa drama in the Bronx because they were seeing rising violence before the last several years. And he's been active on the ground and also asked me to come in and get involved. So listen, we have some major reform that I think a lot of people are advocating for, and I stand here. I do support our public safety officials. I think that defunding the police is the wrong message. I'm not saying there doesn't need to be reform, but I do believe we can have counselors in schools and public safety officials. So I think we can look at it on the ground with what reform needs to happen. But I don't think cutting the NYPD budget at a time where we're seeing crime at an all-time high is the right way to go. So that's where I stand on that issue. And I do want reform. I do want to see any racial bias, any bad actors taken out of the force,
Mm-hmm.
and continue to hold them to the higher standard. But I don't believe that the defunding message is the right way long term for our community to thrive.
Okay. All right. Now, Rikers Island is part of the district. Um, the council passed legislation to close it. Do you agree with that? And second, if you think it should be closed, what would you like to see on the island?
Yeah, so Rikers Island, I'll start with this.
Mm,
I don't believe that in a time where we're seeing our economy at an all-time low, that we should be spending $11 billion, $9 to $11 billion
mm,
building community jails. I don't think that's the best way forward. I'll also say that Rikers Island is crumbling in its infrastructure. There are some inhumane conditions. I would like to see a commission that would actually address some of those issues, whether they be racial or inmates not being able to access proper, heat or,
mhm,
in the summer, air conditioning. Those, I'm for the proposal more to rebuild Rikers, to spend
mhm,
less money, to make it more humane conditions. If the legislature goes forward with building these community jails. I would like to see Rikers Island more of a community asset. I know there's the renewable Rikers. I think we can do some of that as well. But I do think it should be used as a community asset because we don't have a lot of green space. And I think we could really utilize it. And I don't know, I'm sure people will pour in with proposals that we would look to, but I think it should be used as a community asset if they go forward, but I'm not in support of community jails.
All right, fair enough. Rezonings. There've been a lot of rezonings in the 22nd Council District in recent years. What are your thoughts on the way the city goes about doing those? It's generally known as the ULIP process. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's a process that was created out of necessity. When we had the era of Robert Moses, who was just putting anything anywhere. So I think the current process allows for a lot of community input, which I think is always a good thing. We also have a need to have more affordable housing units, but we need to do that in places that has, more positive community impact. A lot of my neighbors obviously are concerned about their rents going up when these developments come in. But I think that we can have responsible development that addresses affordable housing crisis, and we can do that in a positive community way. One of the ways that I would like to work with people coming into our community is because we have a budget deficit, we're going to have a lot of community needs. We have our discretionary funding, but we also have an avenue for if we had people coming in, if they want to do business here, they can make positive community impacts. We could actually have community members voting on some of the things they want to see implemented, whether it's parks and composting, or whether it's, adopt a school because this school didn't get all of their funding. We could actually work with people coming in and, hey, if you want to build, that's great. But we're also asking you make a positive community impact, and maybe you adopt a road and you pay for ACE workers to come in and clean up the street and replace our very outdated trash bins. We make business work and address our social issues. And I think that's a positive way forward. And I think that in a time that we have a budget deficit, we're going to have to use all the tools in our tool belt.
Okay, all right. But in terms of just the general framework of ULIP, develop what's the plan together, it goes before the community board, goes to the borough president, onto the planning commission, city council. What are your thoughts on that? The mechanics of that? Do you think it's working?
I think it's working so far. I wouldn't have any changes. I think if the community wanted changes, then I would certainly look through those. But there's nothing that I have, pressing that I would say this absolutely needs to change.
Yeah.
So yeah.
All right, fair enough. In terms of crime, you touched on it a few moments ago. What would you do? There has been an increase in shootings in the 114th precinct, which the 22nd Council District covers a lot of. How would you handle that as a council person?
I think it's twofold. I think we have a mental health crisis on our hand, and we also have a global pandemic on our hand, and then we have rising crime. I think with some of the rhetoric, there are people who are emboldened, and they don't see that there's going to be consequences for their actions. And I think it's twofold. I think you address it. I don't think you address it by defunding the police. And I think you just have to address it on a community by community basis. If there's certain precincts that need more officers to address the rise in crime, then we do that. But I also think there's a need for a crisis center somewhere that people can come if they're addicted, or they have substance abuse, or they're contemplating suicide or harming themselves or harming someone else. We have a homelessness crisis. We have just so many issues, a mental health crisis. And I think there's been a couple models proposed in other counties. I think Dutchess County has a crisis center, and it's worked really well. I think the governor's looking at doing a statewide model of something similar.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you just can't have a blanket approach. There's obviously a direct correlation between people who are in really bad circumstances in crime, and you can't negate that fact. But I don't think defunding the police is the best way to go. I think it's more preventative and proactive measures, and also addressing the mental health crisis. And also, there's just people who do bad things, and there are consequences for those actions. And we need to keep our community safe and support our public safety officers.
Okay, all right. Now I'm bouncing around in terms of subjects, but I've got to ask you, you're running as a Republican. What are your views on Donald Trump? What are your views on his presidency, and what are your views on this impeachment process right now?
Yeah, that's a loaded question in a lot of regards, but
Mm-hmm.
I'll start with this. I think the Republican Party has to rebuild.
Mm-hmm.
I think the Republican Party in New York City needs to rebuild. We don't have a lot of elected officials who are on the Republican side. So there's a lot of reform that needs to happen.
Mm-hmm.
I did not support Donald Trump's rhetoric. I wish someone would have taken his phone and that he wouldn't have had access to Twitter. So I'll say that there's certainly some positive things he did in terms of the economy, but I didn't support his rhetoric. And I think we have to move past, his presidency and move forward and address some of the ongoing issues that we have. The impeachment process, I understand it, but at the same time, I think it's a distraction from what we need to be doing, which is actually helping people instead of spending taxpayer dollars on this. But I understand the people that are, upset and want to see the impeachment process through. I have tried to stay out of national politics as much as I can, but those are just some of my thoughts. And it's my main goal is really just rebuilding, people who are disenfranchised on both sides, and running and making positive community impact. But I didn't support Trump's rhetoric, certainly.
Sure, okay. Listen, in terms of transportation in the 22nd Council District, there's been protected bicycle lanes on Crescent Street. Councilman Costa Constantinides has, really advocated for a bike network in the area. What are your views on the protected bicycle lane network and just transportation in general in the district?
Yeah, I think we have a lot of transportation deserts in our district. There are areas that don't have access to the subway, and the bus access is very limited as well. There's a lot of change that we need to do in our current subway infrastructure. With bike lanes in particular, we do have a lot of bike commuters that we need to take into consideration, but I don't support the way that bike lanes have been implemented, and I'll give a very specific example. And this isn't something I started off, running for city council and advocating for. This is because I saw so many people reaching out to me concerned about this issue. And so, again, I said I'm not running on my own agenda. I absolutely believe that biking is an economical way to travel. But I think the way that it's been implemented, specifically on Crescent Street, has had negative impact on the residents that live on Crescent, and also some of the small business owners, all of which who've reached out to me, not all of them, but a lot of them have reached out to me regarding the process. So I think how I would make changes to that is, I think, just getting the community a little bit more involved in the decision making of where those bike lanes go. And also with the city bikes, they're taking out a lot of parking in a time where, in a global pandemic, people they don't feel safe to take public transit and some would also say in some of our transportation deserts, bike lanes are actually a positive thing, or a city bike is actually a positive thing. And I would not disagree with that. I think it's just where we place those city bike docking stations. They don't have to take up, 4 parking spaces instead of 19. Maybe we have 10. Let's find places on the sidewalk where the sidewalk's wider, because we do have a lot of, like it or not, there are people who rely on a car for their family, or they have disability, or they're elderly, and we have to take everybody into consideration. At the same time, I think it's a great thing that we have, bike lanes, and that those go in places that make sense for the community. I all around, I would love to see, honestly, where Astoria Boulevard is kind of divides my district.
Mhm.
I would love to see more green space there. I would love to see just a complete rehaul of that entire area, and to actually have walking paths and bike paths in that area. Fix some of the cars parking on the sidewalks. There's a lot of work that we can do together, but I do believe the process needs to be fair for residents who had parking, for example, on Crescent Street, where that was eliminated, and narrowing the streets is obviously a safety hazard as well. So there's a lot of people to take into consideration, and I just think that the process should be a little bit more transparent.
Do you feel as though automobile owners aren't getting enough of a say? Is that kind of what you're saying?
I'm not necessarily speaking to just automobile owners. I think small businesses and residents. For example, I had people who live on Crescent Street who own a home. They purchased a home. They were given no notice that a bike lane was being put right outside their home. And one of them actually said she has a driveway, and she obviously is a car. She owns a vehicle. And when she comes out of the driveway, the bike lane's right there. So it's a hazard more for the people, who are coming out of the bike lane, because there's a lot of driveways right there, and there's a lot of blind spots. And so, but also she owns the property, and they used to have, of course, she has a driveway as well, but that entire area was eliminated, and it's just not safe. And she said the same thing. She said, I support bike lanes, but the way this was implemented, I'm a homeowner, and I was given no notice. So why is that? And some of the small business owners where the parking was eliminated were negatively impacted as well. So I think there's a lot of work. It's a controversial issue. I think there's a lot of work that can be done. I have a bike, I have a car, and I use both. And I want to see more safety measures put in place, but I don't think the current process is fair.
Okay, fair enough. What about buses in the district, and people that live down sort of more towards Astoria Houses area? I mean, obviously the ferry went in, but what can be done to help that transit spot?
I think there's a lot that can be done. Obviously, we need to get people more involved in the process for the bus routes and all of that. I think that's for the community to decide. And there's obviously a huge issue, not just with transportation, but with food access, which is an even larger issue, because they're taking public transportation a lot of times just to get to a grocery store that's affordable. So there's a lot of things that we need to do on the ground to make things more accessible. I think, there's things we can do with the ferry service. There's things we can do with bus lanes or bus routes. And I think that's for the community to decide, really.
All right, fair enough. Again, bouncing around community boards. There's about 50 members on most boards. How would you go about selecting board members?
Well, honestly, I don't think city council members should be selecting community board members. I think if there was any sort of change, it should be that, because if you are a Democrat and the community board is making decisions, you're gonna want to see more Democrats, right? If you're a Republican and the community board makes decisions, you want to see more Republicans. So I think there are certainly ways that we can improve that. I wouldn't really even want to be, I would love to be involved in the process and in other regards, but I don't find it fair that a city council elected official should be determining who's on the community board. I think that should be for the community to decide. I think perhaps we could do that with some community organizations appointing their person to make sure that all people are, represented well. I think there's a huge gap between people who are from lower socioeconomic, or minority communities or immigrant communities. I think there's a lot we can do to get real representation. And the current process certainly lacks lacks that for sure.
Okay, all right. So Felicia, is there any sort of topics that I haven't addressed that's central to your platform and running for office that you'd like to talk about?
I mean, really, the big thing that I always say is, unless someone's talking about, taking care of people and making sure that people have their basic needs met, but also building into the future of our city and getting people back to work.
Mm-hmm.
People want a job, and that's what we have to do. We have to get people back to work. We have to do that responsibly. So I would like to share an idea that I have.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just about bringing in business to Queens, but it's about supporting local entrepreneurship. So one of the things that I would love to see is social incubator spaces where we could, I don't know if we would use discretionary funding, or perhaps we could work with some of the businesses coming in to help subsidize spaces, but we could actually have a free space for artists, theater groups, or retail entrepreneurs or foodies, actually have a space that the community can come into and support local entrepreneurship. It would be an incubating space with the long-term goal of them actually having their own spaces.
Mm-hmm.
It would be on a rotating basis, but we would actually have a dedicated person on my staff helping people either navigate getting a job,
Mm-hmm.
or accessing resources that they need to do so, whether that be education or training, and someone who also helps people start businesses and helps people access funding. And so I'm very excited about that. It's something I have experience in, and I absolutely want to support local entrepreneurship, because the beauty of Astoria is it's filled with creative people, entrepreneurship-minded people, people of all different backgrounds, and I want to unleash that and empower them and really, really just elevate that to a new place where we don't lose, in a time where everybody's afraid that we're going to lose all of our mom and pops, and we have certainly lost a lot of them, but we can build into the future and create more.
Okay, terrific. Well, Felicia, on that note, I'd like to thank you for joining me today.
Thank you, Christian, for having me. It's been a joy.